Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 365 of the Stacey West podcast. I am your host, Ben, and tonight on this Friday podcast, which is a bit of an... We'll talk about that briefly. I'm joined by Chris. How you doing, mate? You keeping well?
Hello. Yes, very well. Very well indeed. End of a busy old week. I did something new today, Ben.
Oh, what did you do?
So I mentioned busy old week at work. I think that's a pretty standard theme at the moment amongst the Stacey West ranks, isn't it? But once a year at my employers, we have a day called a values day. So you can take it when you like, but normally a few of you will do it together. And the idea is, I work in health, fitness, well-being, etc. And it's called a values day because it's something that you can do, which is paid, which is not work, which upholds those values. So 6 of us this morning went and played what is apparently the fastest growing sport in England, something called...
Can I guess?
Go on. Yeah, go on.
Is it paddle?
It is.
Yeah.
It is brilliant. I really enjoyed it. And I didn't really know what to expect because as a kid, you kind of enjoy what you're good at, don't you? Luckily, I was all right at football, so I enjoyed football, so I kept playing football. I was not very good at tennis, for example. I hated it. I was terrible, so I'd never played it more than, a couple of times as a kid. And played it kind of recently. Just a couple of mates were meeting, and they said, "Do you want to come?" And I was like, "Well, not really, but I'm not doing anything else." And it's embarrassingly bad at tennis, embarrassingly bad. Yeah, I was always okay at badminton, which never really made a lot of sense in my head. So I was like, well, am I going to be all right or am I going to be horrific? And I was okay. I could hit it, but it was more than anything, jolly good fun. So yeah, good. I got paid to play paddle this morning. That was lovely.
Oh, that's all right for some, isn't it?
I know. That's maybe me rubbing in it a little bit after the week or two you've had, but it was all good fun. Worth sharing.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into it, but I've had a horrendous fortnight in my day job. It's been all kinds of fun and games, but it's part of the reason why I've been away from the pod for the past couple of weeks. But I have next week off work. I'm going to have all of the fun doing absolutely nothing, and then we're going to the thing on Thursday, aren't we? Up at the EPC.
Yeah, that'll be really good. Looking forward to that next Thursday evening.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that. So it should be good. What else have you been up to? Because there is a piece of very good news that I know me and you will both be very, very excited about, but we'll probably have people screaming at us telling us to get to the football quickly. But anything else fun that we want to talk about before we touch on that?
No, not from me. I've had a pretty busy old time, similar to you. Not as bad as yours, just busy. So I've shared my good news. Do you want to share this good news?
Yeah, it's Ted Lasso's coming back, Chris.
I know, that is exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very exciting. I was it was obviously on the cards, but yeah, for those of you that are Ted Lasso fans listening, I know there's a few. It's coming back for season 4. Very exciting times. But we're not talking about Ted Lasso. This isn't a TV podcast. If it was, me and Chris would be talking about Ted Lasso and Severance and everything else that we've been watching and getting very excited by. It's Lincoln City podcast. Obviously, there's one big bit of news coming out of the club today. So thank you for the club for putting something out for us to talk about. But we will come to that. We will come to that a little bit later on in the show. To start off with, last night, which is one of the reasons why we're later this week, is because it was last night at the club was the fans forum. Fans forums of old were a place where everybody got together and moaned about season ticket prices and not leaving a man up at corners and the toilets and everything else that gets asked of them. And I think the club have turned it around a little bit over the past few. I think we all went to one last year, didn't we? Was it?
Yeah, it was. Was it sort of September, October sort of time? I think early. It was earlier this season, certainly. Wasn't able to make it this time, but you went, didn't you?
Yeah. So yeah, they've kind of tried to add a little bit more in, other than just we're going to sit here and talk nonsense at you while you give us questions, and we'll try and avoid the answers as best we can. Which I'm not sure, that's that's really how they've been handled anyway. You know, I think the answers have been fairly decent and open so far. There was an AGM beforehand. I didn't go to the AGM due to timing, but yeah, apparently there was a couple of questions in there where things got a little bit interesting, shall we say? I don't want to go into it because I wasn't there, but yeah, those of you that were there, yeah, apparently got quite interesting. But then a little break, and then we had the actual fans forum itself. And yeah, I think the club want to try and give something a little bit different in each one at this point. They're not, you know, they like I say, they don't want to have the same old. And last night, Jez and Michael sort of led the first part of the forum where they gave a bit of a presentation around the season, and it was, I think it was quite interesting, and they weren't. I think they led with this isn't a list of excuses, but it was essentially this is what's happening with this is what's been happening on the pitch this season. This is why things are maybe a little bit different to how people potentially expected. And I'll be honest, Chris, I think you would have loved it because
no doubt
it was basically a list of words and numbers and graphs and charts. And yeah, I think you would have been properly in your element. I mean, to give you an example, they started off with XG. They kind of explained the concept of it and said, look, it's obviously not an exact science. It's not it's not a perfect stat. You know, if a ball comes across and nobody gets a foot on it, that's not counted as an attempt. But basically, what they did was they put us in. They showed the club where the club were in the league positions for pretty much everything that they went through. Mm-hmm. So they said, this is where we would have been if stuff like that had gone on, you know, or stuff like that. The XG was actual goals, and then other metrics that they talked about. I've made a list here. So the first one was the XG numbers, which, yeah, again, people will either say yay or nay. Then we had just a number on shot distance and the number of shots. So
yeah, you know what? Because obviously, like you say, this is very much up my street, and I appreciate we're doing this at the start of the podcast, and you don't want me talking about bloody stats for hours. But what I do think is interesting is, and this isn't just at Lincoln City, but I think it's obviously off the back of a fans forum where this was part of the presentation. But in wider football, I think when you see managers and the clubs themselves using the statistical data in just everyday conversation, in interviews, in things like this, it just goes to show that it's real, I think, and it is value. It's not as real as watching it on the pitch, of course, but it gives real insight. You know, I think the big things happened at Liverpool this season, like Arne Slot's been referencing like things like XG, for example, in his press conferences and his post-match interviews, and it just makes, I suppose, the average supporter notice it a little bit. And it was on the TIFO podcast, TIFO Football Podcast with Athletics Outstanding, and I listen to it every week. And they mentioned this. I think it was John McKenzie mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. In that, the more and more these things are used, because the clubs do use data. I think they've always been a little bit concerned since they've started using data. How do you convey that across to supporters in a way that isn't kind of making excuses? It isn't saying, oh yeah, but look at this, we're really good at this, because no stat on its own tells the whole story. It's the context of them all combined which tells the story. But also he thinks, and I think this is a good point, is that you almost get left behind now if you don't engage in at least some of these things. So historically, you know, what were the main stats we used to see? We used to see things like shots on target, possession. That was kind of what you saw. And I imagine when we first saw looking at those, they'd be the same questions. Oh, that doesn't matter. All that matters is the number in the top corner of the TV screen. You know, that's the only thing that really matters. And that's now become just accepted and normal. And I imagine some, not all of them, of course, but some of these things will just become just part of everyday football conversation. So yeah, I always find it really interesting. But off you go.
Yeah, so I mean, the basics that they went through were shot distance and the number of shots that we've had from distances, clear shots. So a clear shot according to the statistic, is when it is literally a one-on-one and there is nobody behind the goalkeeper. So, I think they used James Collins' first goal, for example, as a decent example of that, where he got played through. He's clear of any defenders. There's nothing between him and the keeper, and there's nothing between the keeper and the goal. That is classed as a clear shot. And we were actually surprisingly high up in the division for the number of clear shots that we've had. I think we were second or third, if I remember correctly.
I imagine we're pretty high for just shot location. So I imagine in terms of the percentage of the shots that we take from within the 18-yard box. So of all of our shots combined, how many of them are actually in the box, and how many of them are kind of pot shots or outside the box? I think we're pretty good for that as well.
So we were actually
last season. Go on.
Yeah. So going back to the distance of shots, so we were actually among the teams in the division with the closest average shot. So basically, we weren't shooting from distance all that much, and it was something that Michael was at pains to say, that this is how we want to play. We want to get the ball forward. We want to be in a position where we have a good chance of scoring, and that is obviously going to be relatively close to the goal.
Closer is the score theoretically.
Yes. I mean, it obviously then went into things like possession, crosses that came in, and the one thing that I was slightly surprised at was the team with the most number of crosses. Would you care to guess who that would be?
Oh, I'd love to guess, but I can't even think now. Rotherham.
It's Wrexham.
Oh yes, of course it bloody is. That's literally the only way they attack. They get the ball to Brian
because they've got Ollie Palmer up top. Yeah. But no, it was interesting again to see kind of where we sat in the division across all of it. Set pieces, we're obviously set piece goals. We are top of the division for set piece goals. Then we went into your favourite stat, PPDA. That was actually used as part of the presentation, and there were some video examples in there of what they're talking about. So it wasn't just, here is a thing that we're going to say to you, and we're not going to explain it. Like, there was a bit of an in-depth discussion, and then for some of them there was the video example, and the PPDA was quite well explained, because you had a video of a team trying to play it out, and then within 7 passes we had the ball back and we got it back to them quite quickly. Then there was some stuff about the counter pressing and pressing and how we like to play, and why we counter press when we do. There was a good bit about we won't counter press all over the pitch, and obviously the top 2 teams for counter pressing, I think one would be fairly obvious for you, and the other one may surprise you a little bit.
So I'm guessing the top is Birmingham.
It is indeed.
Second, not sure.
Crawley.
That is surprising.
Yeah. And what was pointed out is that the reason that Crawley are up there is because they do it all over the pitch,
and then they get played through because they're not very good at it.
That's kind of it. It was implied, but it was Crawley are doing it all over the pitch. They're also very high in the possession stats, but we know that that's not necessarily accurate for a mark of quality in that instance. But then it was just a good example of that again, where you could see where we were doing it, and it's obviously in the final third. The counter press comes in. If we lose the ball, we try and win the ball back quickly, and the reason we're doing it is to make the opposition feel out of shape if we get the ball, and then we are able to benefit from that further on.
That's great. I obviously wasn't there, so I can't comment on it specifically, but what I just think is really great is that all this context allows you to go and watch the football on a Saturday and understand at least what we're trying to do. If you've got a picture in your head of you see what the plan is, you can see it doesn't always work, of course, and if you can see when it's failing, then you can point that out as well. But I think the more information we have to understand what we're trying to do, and most importantly why we're trying to do it, and there's a reason behind it, it just allows you to just, I don't want it to sound like high and mighty, but understand the game more. And I don't mean generally, I mean the match you're watching, understand what's actually happening on the pitch right there and then, just a little bit more, and you go, hang on, he was meant to counter press and he didn't, and that's why they got the chance. And then you can criticize that, or you go, he's won that back there because. And if you just rather than just seeing people running around, you can see why they're running around, and that is always useful for all of us.
Yeah.
I'm good. I couldn't go now. That's bloody annoying.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the things that I think I should probably be at pains to mention is that it wasn't a we should be better and we should be higher in the division. We aren't blah blah blah. Wow. We're doing everything right, and therefore we should be. You should all be quiet and accept it, sort of thing. It was very much a this is what we're trying to do. Yes, some of it's been crap this season. Yes, some of it has been underwhelming, but this is what we're trying to do. There was no glossing over anything, and essentially they had like a conclusion screen, and there was a stat that I don't know if this is published anywhere, and I don't know if this is something that's kind of more internal, but it's another 3-letter acronym, and it's another thing that I think you would probably enjoy. Is the stat of OBV. Are you familiar with OBV,
no,
Chris?
No. Tell me what OBV is.
So,
man.
OBV is on ball value.
Oh, is it a bit like expected threat?
I don't know what expected threat is.
Okay, fair enough.
But basically, you can have as much possession as you want, but if you're rubbish with it, if you don't do anything with it, then your OBV, your on ball value, drops.
So it's a team metric rather than an individual metric.
Yes, it's very much a team metric. Yeah. So the example that was given was our sort of perceived when we're at our most dangerous has been roughly when the game's been in most instances when something's about 50-50 in terms of possession, we would probably be less dangerous than if we had 40% of the possession.
Mm-hmm.
So it's essentially when we have the ball, how dangerous are we with what we do with it? And Michael was saying that obviously we want to see more of players on the ball. That's why people pay the money. That's why we want to be here, and we want to enjoy good football. But sometimes you have to bide your time a little bit. And then again, there was all sorts of numbers for OBV, and it's one of those where I look at it and go, I think some of that might be a bit subjective, but there is a trend to it. So yeah, I mean, obviously,
I guess the point is when you do have the ball, you want to make sure you're doing something with it. And how much do we do that compared to our opponents is kind of what that is telling us. So whereabouts were we in the league then for that?
Quite high actually, because again we were relatively low for possession, but because we're dangerous with what we do when we have possession, we're getting up there. So yeah.
I'm guessing it's probably quite weighted by possession stats. So I imagine Birmingham were probably quite low with that, even though they had high possession and they're top of the league, by far the best team. I'm guessing they were sort of mid-table for that, were they?
I think Birmingham were a bit of an outlier in general, to be honest. But again, like Crawley, for example, they're very high with their possession, but their actual quality was low, so they were towards the bottom end of that table. Yeah, what I did find very interesting from the presentation is that the Jez sort of said that the club have invested in some AI metrics and some of the stuff that comes out of that. So I think, well, it was in a public forum, so we can report on it. I think he said that they've invested 10 grand this season into an AI company that analyze literally millions of corner kicks, and they will say, right, well, this type of corner against this opposition, and this is where you need to be. And they showed footage from the training ground as well, so they would say like,
oh, good.
We watched I think it was Northampton. We watched a game at Northampton where a player that is in the zonal marking area, he will run outside that zone to track a man as he runs across. So then we know that that's what we can do. We will then attempt to do that in the game. We'll do it during training. So they basically replicated the scenario and they showed the drone footage, like top down, of what they were trying to do. And then they showed in the game, obviously the corner comes across, 2 people run, the marker tracks 1, Tom Heyman nips around the back, scores from the corner. It was, an example of when it goes right.
And of course, there is a reason why we are top of the league in set pieces. There's no denying that our threat from set pieces is really, really good compared to everyone else in the league. That is a massive win this season. We just need to make everything else a little bit better, don't we? But that's great. Was there anything aside from like performance on the pitch that was really notable from the evening?
Well, I mean, after the presentation, which was exclusively on on pitch stuff and kind of it got open up to the fans. It was kind of pretty regular fans forum fare.
Mm-hmm.
There were some good questions in there. There was a couple that were probing questions, but I think fairly asked. And again, there wasn't any shying away from the answers. There was a question about Rico Hackett, and obviously he's stated that he wants to be higher up the pitch in a radio interview. So that got asked, and it was like, well, what are the views on that? And again, the response was fairly fair. I couldn't think of another word.
I'm guessing. Can I guess the answer?
Go on then.
That when we were playing 3-5-2 last season, and Rico was basically playing a winger and receiving the ball really, really high. So when that position works in the way we want it to, he is effectively playing in the role he wants to. But we haven't had the opportunity to do it as much this season. However, recently he's played the number 10 role, and it suited him really well.
Kind of, yeah. It was essentially like when we needed a left wing back, who had the attributes to do it, and we think Rico could do it, and that was how it sort of came about. So. But yeah, it was a decent showing. I mean, there's always one or two. I would probably say this, and I'll leave it there. But if you are thinking of going to a fans forum in future, and you want to ask a question, I think the important thing to remember is that it's not just you and the people on stage in the room. There were a good 150, 200 people there last night, and there was a couple of moments where it felt a little bit awkward because it was very much a personal question, and it's like you can't really do that in this kind of environment. But it was handled well, and that was that. There was a question actually, and it's something that let's talk about it briefly. I wasn't aware of this, but it is going to happen. Apparently, the Real Mac stand is going to have a bit of a segregation between it and the co-op this season, or the GBM, whatever it's called these days. And I think there seems to have been a little bit of consternation about that, because what it will now mean is that if you are seated in the Real Mac, you can't go out into the fan zone for half time. And there's been a bit of a grumble about that from some areas.
You know what? I can understand this from both sides, by the way, because if you always sit in that stand, you don't abuse the system, then you absolutely should feel like you have the right to go into the fan zone just like everyone else does. Mm-hmm. However, the club with the new tiered seating thing in terms of pricing, that allows the club then to put a very, very affordable season ticket offer in the Real Max stand, as it did last season for the 140 seats for the 140th year. So it was 140 people paying a very, very low fee. Mm-hmm. And what has happened, I'm not saying it's just those 140 people, I'm not saying it's all of those 140 people, but what has been a very obvious trend has been people buying tickets in the cheap areas, sitting there for a bit, and then when the game kicks off or after half time, then going to go and sit with their mates in the co-op stand. And now that the pricing is going to be effectively, that's a more expensive seat than behind the goal, then it's taking the piss now, because it's stopping. But it will be more of an issue later. So I think the only way they could justify having the much cheaper seats and making it so affordable would be to make sure that people can't abuse it, because then you're kind of removing a potential seat then away from someone in a
absolutely,
quote unquote, better area. So I get it. I don't know if there's another solution. If there was another solution, I think it's well worth asking for ideas, because and this was brought up in the supporters board meeting, and we had a real brainstorm, and none of us could think of another solution other than having 1 million stewards checking every single ticket of everyone that's going back from the fan zone at half time, and that's not feasible, is it? So
no.
I understand the frustration about that, definitely.
Yeah, 100%. And again, it's when it's when the minority break it for the others. And it's it's tale as old as time, isn't it? It happens all the time. But yeah, I mean, look, it's a fair thing, and I wonder if there's maybe the chance to have like second fan zone, a bit like Lord of the Rings with the breakfast. Second fan zone.
Well, I don't know if
the-
it was mentioned last night, but at the supporters board meeting, so I think I'm allowed to say this, is that the plan is to have additional things accessible to those people in that corner. So it's not like you can't have any refreshments at halftime or anything. I think it's meant to be more than there is now.
Yeah, it was discussed, and it was again, the answers were fair. There was also a good question about a lack of some social media involvement, such as video stuff from the players and stuff that we've had in the past. And yeah, it was the feedback is heard, and I think there is a plan for more stuff like that. The teammates videos, that kind of stuff, which again is more about bridging the gap between the players and the fans and helping those relationships, I think. But yeah, overall it was a good evening. I think it was worth going for, and I think I think fans forums in the past have been problematic, but I think they're finding a way to have them be a bit more engaging, and that was all good. Well, yeah, I think as we hurtle towards the half-hour point, we should probably throw in the big bit of news from the week for the club, which, as I said, dropped at 5 o'clock. We've obviously gone live on a Friday evening, which we'll talk about in the little YouTube break, because I've seen a couple of people mentioning it in the chat. Yeah, the club put it out at 5 o'clock. Tyler Walker has left Lincoln City on loan. He has gone to Wealdstone until the end of the season. Now, I think it's probably fair to say that we will never see Tyler Walker at Sincil Bank again. I think this is the very definition of our exit loan that is often spoken about, and it kind of raises the question of just how far away is he? Because obviously, if he's going there, he's going to go there to play, and he's going to go there to have some form of impact on Wilston's attempt at survival, I guess. But it's desperately sad, isn't it? Ultimately, I mean, the way that his Lincoln City career's ended.
It is sad. Yeah, we all hoped for the best. Of course, when we signed him, it was a really big kind of statement signing, wasn't it? When we signed Tyler Walker last summer, or the summer before, sorry. Just been terribly unfortunate with multiple injuries, and yeah, they don't all work out, sadly. And it's clearly right for all parties. Tyler needs to go and find a club away from Lincoln that he can play football at regularly. It's pretty obvious that he's not going to be playing for us. We've, in terms of players that we have contracted to us that are pretty established as first team players. James Collins, of course, came in January. Rob Street is scoring goals left, right, and centre for Doncaster. And then we've obviously got Ben House, Freddie Draper, and Javon McCarmer, who can all comfortably play up there and a League One quality with plenty of minutes under their belts this season. Like Tyler is going to be what, 6th, 7th choice if he stays. And so even if he is fit, he's not going to get on the bench, is he? He's not going to play because those other players are way ahead of him in terms of the pecking order. And that's unfortunate, but it's also just a harsh truth, isn't it? And most of those players are contracted for next season as well. So, Tyler's out of contract at the end of this season. In Jez's statement that was on the website, kind of attached to the news, there was no mention of it being the sort of situation where if Tyler does really well, there'll be a contract here at the end of it. There was no mention of that. He's going there to play football. We wish him very, very, very well. It's a bit of a mutual parting of ways. But of course, I'm sure all of us do genuinely wish him well. I really hope he can just, if nothing else, I think Wilson have got 12 games to go this season. They've got plenty of football to play. If he can make 10 appearances at National League, scoring 2-3 goals, he'll get a contract somewhere and probably at that level next season, and he can remain as a professional footballer despite the risk of his injuries. So I think for Tyler, it's a case of this next 12 matches could potentially be quite make or break for his career. I really just desperately hope that he if nothing else, can get a run of games and feel sharp and enjoy it again, because
Yeah.
enjoying it is why we all do it in the first place. So I really hope he can enjoy his football with well wishes from all at Lincoln City, I'm sure.
Yeah, 100%. And it was always one of those conversations where, we've had the privilege of going to the training ground a couple of times, and I think maybe once or twice, I think we've been. Both times I've been, even though he's not been out on the grass with the rest of the squad, Tyler's been in and around the building. He's been in the gym. He's been working to get himself fit again. And I don't think, from what we've been told, I don't think there's been anybody that's gotten there earlier and nobody that's left there later. He's been relentless in trying to get himself back to being able to play football for Lincoln City, and unfortunately, it just hasn't happened for him. It doesn't mean that he's a bad player. It doesn't mean anything like that. He's just been desperately unfortunate. And yeah, I don't think there'd be anybody really that would give him anything other than their best wishes to go ahead. I mean, what I found quite interesting actually was that in the Wealdstone statement on signing him, it says Wealdstone FC Supporters Club have played a huge role in securing Tyler's signature, funding his wages until the end of the season.
Brilliant. So we got him off the wage bill then.
It sounds that way. I don't know if that's a 100% funding. I mean, the way that it's worded suggests that it is, but yeah.
Interesting. Well, either I think let's look at this from a brutal business point of view. Like, there are humans that we're talking about here, which always doesn't always align, does it? But let's look at this from a business point of view. If Tyler Walker stayed in the building in any way, shape, or form between now and the end of the season, we'd be paying his full wages. So whatever percentage that Wealdstone are paying means that we're saving it. And if that's all of it, half of it, 20% of it, whatever it might be, every penny counts, doesn't it, at the end of the day? So it makes sense for all parties. It's just a bit sad because it didn't work out. But let's be honest, when it was announced that he picked up his most recent injury, we all knew it was over, didn't we? We all knew it was over for him at Lincoln City, and it was sad then. It's sad now, but it's weird. Like, I've already kind of mourned in a way.
It's one of those, isn't it? It's like when that injury hit, you're like, yeah, well, that's his career done for us then. I guess we'll wait until the end of the season and say, all right, thank you, bye. But it's happened a bit earlier, so yeah, hopefully he can get a few games under his belt. I think they've still got to play Boston. Yeah,
that'd be a big old game, because Boston are starting to pick up. They're unbeaten in 4 now, I think. 1-2 out of those 4 as well. They're only 5 points, I believe, away from Fylde, who are in 20th, outside the playoffs, outside the relegation zone. I think Boston have got a spare game. I've got quite into not following as in like going and watching the games, but I genuinely hope they stay up. And I don't know if I feel right about that as a Lincoln City supporter, but I genuinely hope they stay up, mainly because it means we can loan players to a league higher than we would have done before. But it's just, I think that's the size club they are as a National League club. But hey,
they have. They're playing them. Oh, they play them twice in the space of 2 and a bit weeks.
Blimey.
They play them at home on the 18th of April, and they play them away on the 1st of April. So
6 points is both of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So there we go. Right. Well, that is a decent spot to wrap up the first half of the show. We're going to head away for a little ad break. Those of you on YouTube, stick around. We'll say hello, and we'll come back in a sec after these adverts. Hello to all of those lovely people on the YouTubes.
Hi, YouTube.
Let's go through some comments. Who's in? Flossie is in as ever. How we doing? Ed is in. Andy Brown is in. Good to see you. Neil is in. Steve is in. Roy says, Friday podcast, what's going on? We've just been really, really, really busy.
Yeah. And also the fact that the fans forum was on last night, and we thought it makes sense for one of us to go so we can experience it, but ultimately one of us then was not going to be available to record a podcast at the same time. So at the moment it's just you and me that's available to do this at the moment. So we thought it would make sense to do it on Friday for that, so you could go, and also so we could have something to talk about, because there wasn't a lot of news this time yesterday.
Indeed, that's the official reason. The real reason is we've just been really busy. Yeah. So Ed says they're watching the pod. I think that was when he said, what's coming out of the club at the minute. I thought Chris produced the figures, says Steve.
I'm quite annoyed. I didn't get the OBV question, to be honest, Ben, because I have heard of that before, but it's not something I've known with League. I don't know how you find that in League One. It must be something the club do themselves, because I've not seen that on any of the metric sites I see.
Fair enough.
But yeah.
Andy says that. Andy's saying good evening. John Booth says good evening. Gaz says happy Friday. What's everyone's thoughts on Tyler Walker leaving on loan? I think as we say, it's Roy says it's a good move for him, and I think for us. Andy says feels sorry for Tyler, was hoping for great things. Would he be worth a pay-as-you-play contract? I said I think not. I think maybe his level is potentially not at this point anymore. Ed says on-board value. Hopefully I explained that a little bit, Ed.
Ed will absolutely know what it is. Ed, I don't tend to go on the Discord as often as I should, so I apologise for all of you that do subscribe. But the few times I've been on there, Ed's been absolutely on it with his stats and metrics. So I have no doubt that he knew exactly what it was when you asked that question.
MK Spoke says, "Hey everyone, how we doing?" Steve says, "Very well put." I think that was in response to the fans forum plea, I guess. I think 6 points from the next 2 games and we can call ourselves safe, says Johnny Benton. I would probably argue we might be there already, but yeah, to be absolutely certain, definitely. Gaz says dropping conference may help extend Tyler's career like it did Adam Marriott. That's a good point. That's a really good point. I was actually surprised that Adam Marriott's still playing and he's at Boston as well. And just to stroke the egos a little bit, Chris, there's a comment here which we have to show. Roy says best team podcast pair.
Oh, thanks, Roy. I'll pay you later. Cheers, mate.
So there we go. That is our quick hello and all the way around. So we will jump back in to the podcast where we look ahead to the weekend's games. So 3, 2, 1. And there we go. That was some adverts again. And I'd like to get a list of who we've got adverts for before they go on, because it'd be nice to say, oh, yeah, go and buy a Mackey's or whatever. I don't know. It's not McDonald's anymore, is it? It's whoever. But yeah, interesting one. Right. Weekend. We've got a home game, Chris.
Hooray!
On Saturday, Chris.
I know.
We've had a full week to prepare. So that means we're going to win, doesn't it?
I hope so. It's not as simple as that, though. Playing teams in form, and it's really even the teams down towards the bottom end of the table, we seem to catch them when they're in form, which is frustrating.
Yeah, so obviously Bristol Rovers visiting the Bank on Saturday. First up, I just want to put a quick apology out. I did have a preview record scheduled, but unfortunately timing just fell through a little bit when I was due to record it, and then we couldn't rearrange it due to, I think, unavailability on that side, unavailability on this side, and then the fans forum got everywhere. And there hasn't been a preview put up for this. We did try and get a second one, but we didn't get a response in time. So without an opposition fans view, Chris, I think I'm probably going to be relying on you a little bit today to explain what to expect from Bristol Rovers ahead of the weekend. Bear in mind, they had a decent win on Tuesday night against Bolton. It was one of those games that you looked at and you thought, that's not necessarily an easy win for Bolton, but I mean to go went back and forth a bit, didn't it? I think it was 1-0, 1-1, 2-1, 2-2, and then 3-2 in the 88th minute for Bristol Rovers. That felt a little bit like, I know again they're a little bit lower down the table, but did that feel a bit like a statement win for them in their quest for survival?
Yeah, there's been quite a lot going on at Bristol Rovers since Boxing Day. Of course, Inigo Calderon, the new manager, came in on Boxing Day. Since then, their form has been patchy. It has been patchy, including their last 3 games. And there's something very specific about their last 3 games that's worth talking about. But in their last 3 games, they'll be 14th in the league table. So despite themselves being within touching distance of the relegation zone, since Calderon came in, they're very mid-table. We're actually a little bit lower than them. They picked up 5 more points than we have in the same time frame, albeit they played one extra match. But we know we've obviously had a horrible run that I think we're kind of we've come out of now. But within that, we had a really, really, really bad run of form So they're probably two evenly matched teams in terms of where they are right now, in terms of form, if nothing else. What's quite interesting is that they played a back four pretty much all season since Calderon came in, so not all season, but since Calderon came in. And in their last 3 matches, they played 3-5-2. And in those 3 games, they drew 0-0 away at Shrewsbury, beat Huddersfield 1-0, and then beat Bolton 3-2. And by the way, they absolutely deserve to beat Bolton in terms of the overall balance of the game as well. So as much as the scoreline looks like it was a very, very tight game, they absolutely deserved it. They had far better opportunities than Bolton did. So, yeah, they're on good form off the back of a tactical switch, which is frustrating.
That sounds familiar, Chris.
It does a little. Yeah. So what's I think quite fun is that we were pretty much a plug and play 3-5-2 for the majority of the season. And we've recently transitioned away from that more often than not into a 4-2-3-1. And Bristol Rovers were kind of the opposite. There are a lot of metrics actually that are quite similar about the two teams in terms of style. The only difference is we have significantly more touch in the box. So I'm guessing that in terms of what do we do with our possession, the on-ball value thing you mentioned earlier, we'll be better than Bristol Rovers at that over the course of the season. But very recently, they are in good form, unbeaten in 3. They will probably call themselves almost safe if they do get that 3 points tomorrow. I think we already are. But like you say, and Michael mentioned in his pre-match press conference that, yeah, we're not yet. Like mathematically, we're not. So as much as we want to start looking ahead for next season, we want to make sure that we perform well, give the fans something to cheer, play with a bit of freedom. We're not safe yet. So the 3 points is the most important factor. So I think that was quite an important message that Michael sent in his presser, because I think it feels to everybody that season's kind of over in terms of much to play for. I would quite like to just enjoy going to the football with not really much pressure anymore. But I think internally there's always pressure, is kind of what you're saying. There's always pressure. There's players playing for contracts. There's players playing for an extension. There's people wanting to get in the team for next year. And also we're not safe. So I don't think there's any doubt that we're taking this seriously. One big comparison of the two teams, and it's something mentioned already, is set pieces. So we're, of course, the best in the league from an offensive perspective. We've scored the most set piece goals in League One. Bristol Rovers conceded the second most. So they are woefully bad at defending and scoring set pieces, at their second fewest that they've scored, and they've conceded the most. So they've only scored 7 from set pieces all season, which is the second fewest, and they've conceded 22 goals from set pieces this season. We have scored 23 and conceded not too many. So if you're a betting man, you probably bet on a Lincoln victory
from set pieces.
From a set piece, like a 2-1 or something, because clean sheets have not been particularly easy to come by recently. So I'd imagine it would be like a 2-1 with a 2 set piece goals or something along those lines. But one other thing that's a little bit similar, because of all the things you mentioned earlier about the fans forum and all the metrics and all that sort of stuff, which shows that we're probably doing quite a few things right, and there's certainly a plan to our action. We haven't had a single player in the team score more than 5 league goals, and neither have Bristol Rovers.
Yep.
So goal scoring is their biggest challenge as well. So Chris Martin has scored 5, Rul Saturiu scored 5. They will likely be the front 2 that start the game tomorrow. So I'm not saying they're poor players, of course, but they're probably suffering from a similar challenge that we are. When they do get the ball into those dangerous areas, maybe not quite taking those chances. So open game, loads of missed chances, or scoring a header. That'd be nice.
Yeah, I mean, it is, again, it just sort of to go back to the fans forum. It was one of those things that was mentioned where it's like, we aren't scoring enough goals. We are creating chances. We're just not finishing them. It's a problem. It's not like they don't understand it at the club. It's not like it's a foreign concept and everyone can see it apart from the management team. It's something that's known, and it's how we try and deal with that. And I think the interesting one was, that's one of the reasons why we signed James Collins, because he can finish.
Sometimes it is as simple as that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sometimes it is.
Yeah. Actually, one thing I forgot to mention was about counter-attacking and how we've dropped in terms of the amount of goals that we've scored through counter-attacking.
Quite significantly, I seem to think, this season.
And I think a reason that was discussed about that is teams are playing over us. They're not trying to play through us, which kind of prevents the press, and it prevents all of that stuff. So Chris is looking very smug.
Well, because we mentioned that about 2 weeks ago, didn't we? That was just literally something we mentioned on here. That the teams are playing against us in a very different way than they were last season.
Yeah, so it's the question was asked of Michael and said, what's the most challenging part of your job? And he says, well, winning. It's figuring out what's potentially broken and how we can fix it. That's what he's paid to do, and that's what he'll hopefully continue to do. But yeah, going back to Bristol Rovers, every time, I know it's hack, I know it's cliche, but every time Chris Mahin's mentioned, I just think, he should play for Oxford. Because they're all Anyway, no, look. I
forgot something about Bristol Rovers. This is quite an important thing. So I mentioned that they're on better form than we are marginally. We're on similar form. They're crap away from home. So they have got, over the course of the season, the third worst away record. They've only won 3 of their 18 away games, only drawn 2. So they've lost 13 out of their 18 away games. And out of their last 6 away games, so in the away form table, if you like, they have lost 5 and won 1. So you would like to think that that gives us a little bit of something. And as much as they have won their last 2 games against 2 strong opposition, they were both home matches. So hopefully we can have a quick start, early goal, and a comfortable afternoon would be nice. But I don't think it'll be quite as simple as that, personally.
No, I mean, big question. How do we start? How do we line up? Presuming that, the players that have been available for us over the past couple of games are all fit. Starting 11 and, formation. Do we drop back to what we did with Birmingham and kind of go back to our the sort of 3-5-2, or do we do what we did against Crawley and hope that we don't concede the early goal but still come away with a decent enough result?
Both is my opinion, because what's quite good is with a lot of our selections you can play both shapes with the same lineup. Dom Jeffries being very versatile helps with that. Sean Rowan being able to play as a traditional left back and overlapping at times, or sitting in as a left centre back helps with that as well. So I think we will play 4-2-3-1 in possession, which gives us the overload out wide, and it allows us to play Jovan Makama as a right winger, which is I think we've probably all settled on that's his most threatening position when he can get the ball and run with it. But because they're likely to play 2 up top, it would be very silly for us to have a rest defence of just 2 centre halves against their 2 centre backs. I imagine we will probably play a 4-2-3-1 in possession, but out of possession. Sorry, not out of possession. When we have the ball, I imagine Sean Rowan won't be quite so adventurous in his under/overlapping. I imagine he will tuck in to give us a 3v2 at the back, unless we're chasing the game late on, which would maybe say potentially we'll see someone like Rico playing left side to give us natural width if Sean isn't going to be doing the overlapping that's often. That would maybe be my way of doing it, but I am not paid the big bucks to put these things together. But yeah, I think, we're at home. Bristol Rovers, as much as they've won 2 games on the bounce, they're poor away. They have a very specific weakness. So for us, how can you generate the most long throws and corners and free kicks in dangerous areas? It's getting the ball forward quickly. It's driving at players with the ball at your feet. Like running with the ball is when you're most likely to win a free kick, rather than it being intercepted or challenging the air. Like you've been tripped up, it's most likely to give you a free kick, isn't it? So it makes total sense to have someone like Jovan Makama playing touchline wide and driving forward, potentially someone like Rico playing that on the left-hand side, which would, by the way, be very harsh to Dom Jeffries, who I think has been outstanding recently. So maybe he would deserve to keep his place. But just stylistically, maybe Rico suits this fixture more. And then that's a way of getting the ball into high, wide areas where you're either going to get crosses in the box or you're going to win set pieces, which allows us to be threatening. So how do you create more opportunities against a team that's poor at defending set pieces? It's width, it's overloads out wide, balls in the box, keeping the pressure on. But there's no point kind of trying to play through the thirds too much against this team. I don't think. I think we want to stick it on them and stay in their part of the pitch to win fouls, win set pieces, that sort of stuff. So I think it will be a game of attrition in that regard. It'll just be quite territorial, maybe. And then if we get a lead, then I imagine it will play into our hands. The problem will be, as it has been all season, if we start well, don't score, Bristol Rovers grow into the game, and then we're chasing, and they'll be deeper and deeper and deeper, and that'll be a challenge. So yeah, they do pose a threat. Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent. Unlike me, isn't it? But to answer your question, I actually think both. I think we can shift in and out of a 4-2-3-1 and a 3-5-2 in and out possession. But I think that certainly allows us to have Jovan as a wide right. It allows us to probably have some, maybe if Rico does start on the left, Ben House in the 10, which allows us to counter press really well if we're trying to keep them pinned in. And then obviously James Collins is pretty much a nailed on starter when it's a 1 game week, isn't he? So that'll be my suggestion. Who plays in the 2-6 roles is anyone's guess, because I think any combination of the players that are available would be viable, but also, no one's really made that position their own just yet. So with the absence of Ethan Arahan, so it'd be interesting to see who starts in those 2-6 roles. But I imagine we will play with 2-6s.
Yeah, I mean, let's briefly touch on the Arahan situation. Obviously, the conversation turned to that in the pre-match press conference, and the injury situation around the club at the minute. I think Ethan Arahan is probably about 4 weeks away still, so we will potentially see him for a few games before the end of the season. Jack Moylan maybe a little bit longer, so he may get a little bit of game time before the season finishes. Yeah, it's well, we say it every season, don't we? It's just a shame.
They're two players that are obviously Ethan's our best player, or certainly our best footballer. Obviously, Pordy is probably our most influential player, I would say. But those two are outstanding, obviously. And then Jack had a real purple patch, didn't he? Earlier in the season, sort of October sort of time. But he's just threatening. Like when he has the ball, things happen. And we've kind of missed that in his absence, certainly. Until Joe Gardner, obviously, in the last couple of games, has come on and been a real live wire. But we've just really missed that little bit of spark. And that's, we go to football to enjoy it. And it's players like Jack Moylan that make you really get off your seat and enjoy for, its raw beauty. Only nerdy people like me like to look at the stats and watch teams when they haven't got the ball and really kind of find that enjoyable. We all like it more when someone's making something happen, someone's doing something exciting or different or unpredictable, maybe is a good word. So we've massively missed Jack for that. But I'm just pleased to hear that he is likely to be back, even if it's only for the last game or two. It's not like he's going to be out all summer, like Ethan Hamilton, for example, was last season. He didn't come. He missed the end of last season, missed all pre-season, and I would say he hasn't really quite got going at any point. That's partly because he hasn't had a run in the team, but it's good to hear that Jack will be ready by the end of the season, so he can at least, if nothing else, have a full pre-season. And then go into next season afresh.
Good question here from Andy in the chat. He says, "Would you start Joe Gardner instead of Rico Hackett?"
Great question. No. And that's not anything against Joe. It's just when you're playing against a team that's recently transitioned to a back 3/5, your overload's wide. So it makes sense to have really wide touchline hugging wingers to stretch the pitch and create as much space as you possibly can. If you've got someone that naturally wants to cut inside, that kind of plays into their hands a little bit. So that's only if we do play that shape, of course. But I think Joe will come on, and I think when he comes on, it'll be really exciting because it appears he always is.
Yeah, he looked really impressive in the spell last week. Good one. And while we're on the subject of Joe Gardner, actually, there was an interesting question last night from a young man. Says Steve says, "I thought Jez's answer about Joe Gardner was interesting at the fans forum." So the question was asked of Jez, would there be any chance of getting Joe Gardner on loan for a full season next season? Jez got the microphone and just went, shh.
Fingers crossed then, eh?
So maybe there's something in the works there. I mean, part of me thinks it just makes sense.
It makes total sense for all parties as long as no one else gets there ahead of us. That's the only thing. If he does so well, someone else will want him. And so maybe the answer to your question then, Andy, in terms of would you start Joe instead of Rico? No, because we want to keep him secret.
Who was it that they said that about recently? Was it Joe? I'm sure there was something in a press conference where they said, we need to keep him secret because then other clubs won't want him. We can get him in some sort of extended contract or whatever. But yeah, look, that's kind of looking ahead to the game. One thing to mention tomorrow, of course, is the dedicated fixture for Her Game 2, which is a campaign to kind of increase women's visibility in sport and make sure that everyone sort of feels comfortable. Everyone's got a right to. Slight vested interest in that my wife is part of the one of the ambassadors for Lincoln City. But yeah, if you see the flyers around, if you see anything that's going on there, get involved with it because it is a really good cause, and hopefully, more will be to come on that front. I'm trying to think of anything else that we've got to potentially fill 5 minutes.
I've got no news, Ben. I would love to say, I forgot to say this, but no, honestly, I have nothing else to add. It's annoying with Bristol Rovers because I would have had loads of stuff if they hadn't changed their bloody shape in the last 3 games. But they have. So all the stuff about before that's kind of irrelevant in terms of like how do they approach the games because it has changed quite a lot.
Yeah.
So that's that. Really, Bristol Rovers will be 3-5-2 almost certainly. We might be. We might not. That'll be the interesting thing to see. Can we beat it? That's the question.
Yeah. Have you got any particular memories of any Bristol Rovers games in the past?
Well, yeah, there's been millions of goals in the last few, hasn't there? So last season was it 5-1, 5-0? I can't remember what the score was. It was one of those. It was within that spell of games where we scored like a gazillion goals in a week. And then obviously the Mark Kennedy game where it was 6-3, which at the time was fun, but I think it's been referenced so often for different reasons now because that was when we changed from Mark Kennedy's quite open 4-3-3. Playing aggressive attacking football that he mentioned in his first press conference to him thinking, bloody hell, we're really open. I'm going to get sacked. Let's play 11 men behind the ball for the majority of the game. And we were good at that. But we obviously were very, very limited going forward. But it became a real turning point in, I think, not just Mark Kennedy's reign here, but how he was seen as a manager, really, and what his strengths are. Because when Swindon hired him, they said that they were impressed by how solid his Lincoln City team was, and obviously it didn't quite transpire at Swindon. Well, they're the same issues because they couldn't score, could they? But so they're the two. I think they're hardly hot takes, are they? Those two, those two. Other than of course the very painful playoff fixture against them. What about you?
There's two that spring to mind. There was one. It must have been. I can't remember the year, but Bristol Rovers was my first away game.
Oh wow!
Because my grandparents live in Chippenham, and we always used to go down there, and once twice a year. And we went down there and we went to Bristol Rovers, and I remember I think the away stand at Bristol Rovers has changed quite a few times over the years because it used to be a little tiny pen in the corner. And I remember it was the first time that I'd seen a goal scored against us in an away ground, and I just went, "Oh, this is weird," because it was the ground felt very, very full, and normally, when the opposition score, it's like a little bit of noise from over there, but then all of a sudden you are that little bit of noise from over there, and the noise from a home crowd when they score against you, I suddenly went, "Oh, don't like this, but I like it at the same time." Because
it makes you really appreciate atmosphere, doesn't it? Because when you're always part of it, at home, you don't see it. The one that really jumped out to me, this is not anything to do with Bristol City, but Bristol Rovers, by the way. But it's when I went to watch St. Pauli away at Dusseldorf last season before last, and they lost 1-0. It was last season. It was November last season, and it was great being part of the St. Pauli kind of fans. They tend to sell out most away ends there, but it's a 50,000 seat stadium and there was about 40,000 people there. When Dusseldorf scored, you go, "Oh wow!" Like what a noise that is. It was incredible. It really was. Like it maybe I do like watching St. Pauli. It doesn't feel the same as watching Lincoln City. Obviously, it didn't hurt as much as it would hurt if watching Lincoln City concede a goal. I was just in awe of the atmosphere. It was just like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. I've had another Bristol Rovers memory though. When Junior Agogo got sent off for swearing at the bench. That was funny.
Yeah, I can remember that. It's one of those players where it's like Junior Agogo. It's a very descriptive name. Yeah.
He did.
Yeah. But no, the other one that springs to mind is the playoff game. When we were away, I went to the away leg of that. I was at university, so I went from Birmingham to Bristol, and we were as I was walking to the ground from the train station, I was on my own, and out of nowhere, a Magners bottle just sailed past my face, and I went, "Oh!" Looked to my right, and then just saw like a load of people just swarming towards us. I was like, "I'm going to stand at the side of the road and let all of this blow over." So yeah, that was an experience. That was the away leg of that playoff game, but let's not talk about the game. No, actually, did we win the away leg? We lost the home leg.
I remember it hurting. That's all I remember. I can't remember. It was a big
score on aggregate, wasn't it?
Let's find out. This is great audio.
Sorry,
typing away on Google right now.
This is where we need the This is where we need the big old the big old encyclopedia that is Gary's brain.
He'll be back soon, everyone, by the way.
Lincoln City 3, Bristol Rovers 5. Bristol Rovers win 7-4 on aggregate. So no, we would have lost the first one. Would have lost the first round. First leg, but yeah, it was not the game that was stuck in the memory there. It was everything else around it. But look, keep buying tickets to the Stacey West Gary's London Marathon raffle. Get him above his targets. He is absolutely smashing his training. I'm pretty sure that we're all relatively sick of seeing the letters PB popping up.
Yeah, he's showing off now, isn't he?
He is just showing off. I mean, considering that my PB for anything would be about a week, I'm just amazed at how he continues to smash it. So, yeah, look, the London Marathon is the 27th of April, I want to say, something around then. As his training progresses towards then, keep supporting him, keep chucking a few quid at him. Ed says OBV, Sam Pauli, Tifo, and John McKenzie all mentioned on the podcast. Good stuff. There we go. But that is episode number 365 of the Stacey West podcast. If you want to listen back to all of the numbered episodes, if you start with one a day now, we'll see you this time next year. That's a scary thought, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
But yeah, we'll hopefully be back on Sunday. Possibly Monday. I don't think I'll be about on Monday because
it'll be Sunday. We'll be back to normal now, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back to normal now.
Absolutely. But until then, as ever, up the imps.
Up the imps.